Vavi's perspective. It was clear that the meeting of powers had been an eventful one. During the conference, Arcasa was once again struck by another planetary blackout. No sooner had the power returned to our lights than were radios buzzing to life with messages from world leaders. Hold your fire and watch the skies. As a scientist, there were few times in my life that I wished not to know something, as knowledge itself was utterly priceless. This was one of those times. With what Andrew had told me the night before leaving, I knew that blackout was a surefire sign of wormholes being generated nearby, and there was only one civilization we knew of that could create these traversable rifts in space. That night, news stations were abuzz with manic theorizing. Conclusions ranged wildly from experimental weaponry to divine intervention. All that was unanimous amongst the masses was that something big had just occurred, something world-shaking. The second blackout, not long after the first, served to confirm my own suspicions. When Salkim's personal transport finally touched down on Steelnist's landing pad, I was the first Kafel in line to greet its passengers. Less than 2 days had passed since the human had left with our Prime Minister, but for me it felt like an eternity. Needless to say, I was happy to finally be reunited with him. Not to mention, I was anxious to finally learn the complete meaning of this mysterious radio message. There would have been little point at this juncture in denying my feelings for the alien scientist. After several esthria of working together with Andrew, I had many good reasons to believe he felt similarly. And so, when I first saw Salkim exiting his transport without the human following close behind, I will readily admit that within me, I could feel the beginnings of panic. "Where's Andrew?" I asked the Prime Minister, my voice tinged with a venomous dollop of accusation. Immediately, a horrendous host of nightmare scenarios began to soar through my mind. Surely, I reasoned to myself, there was no way my human could have come to harm at the hands of mere Kafel. That being said, the look on Salkim's face told a different story altogether. Regarding me with a look of apologetic coldness, the Prime Minister sighed in defeat before finally offering up a reply. "We were contacted by a representative of the species that wiped out Ulmara," he began, cringing in reply to my corresponding squawk of shock. "She requested to take Andrew in for questioning, and he managed to acquire for us in return one of their own kind." "And you agreed to it?" I roared, absolutely furious with the Prime Minister for allowing such danger to befall my human. "Andrew didn't exactly cede that choice to yours truly," Salkim replied, seemingly unfazed by my emotional outburst, or at the very least trying his best not to make things even worse. "And you say you have one of them with you?" Immediately, as though on command, the cargo hold of Salkim's vessel opened up to reveal a truly terrifying being sitting within. "You need not be afraid," he began, ducking out of the transport and approaching us in an elegant stride. With skin like brass, this creature glittered in the light of early dawn as it loomed at the back of the Prime Minister. "I assure you, Andrew is safer in Irigan care than he's ever been in that of your kind," he sneered, regarding us with a look of smug superiority. "Good, because if your people so much as pluck one hair from his head, I'll be honest. Making threats was definitely not a talent of mine. I usually hadn't the words nor courage to attempt intimidation on other members of my species, let alone a 3-meter-tall alien who looked as though he could snap my neck if he grabbed it and sneezed too hard. My failed attempt at a threat was met by this creature with a light bout of whimsical laughter eerily reminiscent of Andrew's. "I apologize, Miss Vavi," he hummed, swiftly clearing the distance between us before promptly reaching down and brushing back my plumage as one would a hatchling. "Your anxieties have been duly noted and will be addressed appropriately." Offering up to me a sigh of resignation, the Prime Minister trilled in thinly veiled frustration as this Irigan prattled off a plethora of platitudes. Finally, upon the opening of a brief window of silence, Salkim took the opportunity to speak. "Ulmil here will be spending the day with our science division before being passed off to the other nations. Please learn all you can from him. Now, if you'll excuse me," he hummed, turning back around and ambling up the stairs of his transport craft. "I have fires to put out back in Goldnest." I was in shock. Even as the Prime Minister's transport faded from view against the murky blue sky, I could hardly put one talon in front of the other to guide our new guest further into Steelnest. "Your planet is very beautiful," commented Ulmiel, his tone retaining from earlier its patronizing quality, the likes of which made me want to scream in fury. It's a shame its surface is marred by so much suffering. What do you mean? I asked him, curious as to what these maniacs might define as suffering. In their eyes, was it better to kill off a civilization than to allow suffering? That would explain what they did to the Ulmarans. To my unpleasant surprise, Ulmiel seemed to find this question rather amusing, immediately beginning to chuckle upon hearing it. Poverty, war, disease. What are your thoughts on these things? Again, I hadn't the foggiest clue what he was getting at. They're awful, I confessed, casting my head away from the Iragon in shame. Even still, though, if poverty is the price of self-determination, I'd argue it to be well worth it. Spoken like someone who's never lived in poverty, he sneered, brushing aside my reply with an unimpressed huff as we proceeded through the halls. Think about all the pain and misery allowed by the governments of this planet. Under Iragon rule, no such suffering exists. Every civilization has flaws, I cawed emphatically, jabbing an accusatory claw toward this alien. I'm sure yours is no different. Hearing this, Ulmiel continued his tittering, again openly regarding me as a chick unaware of the world's workings. In some ways, I suppose you're correct, he smiled, running his fingers along the wall of the facility as we went. I suppose one could think of it as a matter of civilizational maturity. Our species has been spacefaring for over 3,000 years. Needless to say, we've had plenty of time to iron out our more major flaws. Our civilization has reached functional maturity, whereas yours is still confined to its cradle. To put it simply, Vavi, he continued, his tone sharpening to a fine tip as he spoke, pitting your species against us in any category is like putting a literal infant up against a fully grown adult. There is nothing you have we couldn't take if we so desired. Nothing you could do if we decided to obliterate this entire backwater dirtball you call home. The fact is, you should be grateful that all we want is to help your kind. Because if we didn't, if we were actually looking out for ourselves, then your kind would be in a zoo at best and a museum at worst. Hearing such a frightening proclamation of power from one of these Iragon was sobering. They were right that we could by no means stop them. Still, I hadn't expected such a hostile reaction. Looking down upon my newly quivering form, the cold look in Ulmiel's eyes was replaced by one of glowing, false compassion. I apologize, he sighed defeatedly, leaning up against the metal wall and waiting for me to recompose myself slightly before piping up again. Perhaps I laid it on a bit too thick. I just wanted you to understand that this is all for the best. Silence hung between us for a long time as once again this creature contemplated what deception he might next employ. Tell me, Vavi, he began, his tone tinged with curiosity as he spoke. Would you rather be guaranteed happiness or guaranteed freedom? This, to me, was an easy question. Freedom, I replied, allowing the conviction within my voice to echo through the halls. How could I possibly be happy knowing I'm not free? Fascinating. Ulmiel nodded, proceeding down the hallway on his own before looking back to me and gesturing toward the break room door. We can table that topic for now while you introduce me to the other scientists, he added. Maybe it was merely my perceptions playing tricks on me, but looking upon this Iragon's smile now, I could swear it was more genuine than the one before.
Andrew's perspective. Following my conversation with Zymera, in which she supplied me with a spare communicator, curiosity rather quickly outgrew my sense as I found myself surfing their web in search of any information that might help me. The Iragon's information highway was shockingly analogous to that of my own kind, operating primarily off of a search engine labeled Net Steward, presumably state-funded judging by the name and lack of other options. Even if the information was censored, however, it'd still be better than nothing. Taking a deep breath to steel myself against whatever horrors lay beyond, I activated the virtual keyboard and began typing out queries in the Iragon language I could now understand pretty much perfectly. First things first, I murmured, typing in the names of the two species Zymera had mentioned during our private debate. My spelling wasn't precisely perfect, but fortunately came close enough to give the communicator an inkling as to what I wanted from it. Clicking on the first result for Rekis, I was surprised by how forthcoming the information was. Documented meticulously within the imperial site on which I'd found myself were details of this species' history, extending back hundreds of years before their integration, along with notes on their evolution. Their home planet, the name of which I wasn't even going to try to pronounce, was apparently far more hostile than most. Its orbit on the outer rim of an M-class star's habitable zone resulted in a cold, harsh environment. The only areas that had been habitable for permanent settlements during their Stone Age were patches of verdant forest surrounding their planet's numerous volcanoes. Some Iragon scholars cited this immense resource limitation as the reason behind the Rekis's genocidal culture. That being said, the advent of better agricultural technology and the end of an ice age on this planet meant the Rekis practice of culling their own was likely entirely unnecessary once they reached the medieval age. By that point, however, such a practice had been so deeply ingrained into their culture that they continued it regardless of need. In terms of environment, the Ikail's home planet was almost the complete opposite. Large swaths of tropical rainforests and open savannas decorated the surface of their home planet, Grico, which was surprising given that its sapient species had evolved from desert dwellers. The culture documented here was as brutal and lawless as Zimera had made it out to be. Due to their planet's singular continent, not unlike the Pangaea of prehistoric Earth, the culture of this species had become fairly monolithic by the dawn of their industrial age. Lacking a central government to enforce currency, the Yikail primarily operated off of an anarcho-capitalist barter economy. The closest thing these aliens had to a planetary leader was a warlord nicknamed Karak, who had some fucking how managed to monopolize firearms. Literally all era-appropriate guns on the planet were manufactured by his army of slaves. These involuntary workers were frequently executed if they failed to make quota. Even children were not exempt. Apparently, those were not the only two species in the Empire with downright awful pasts. Indeed, out of the 13 other peoples I digitally dug into that night, 4 of them were of a similar moral caliber. That's not to say the others were perfect, just that they were leaps and bounds ahead of the worst. Returning to the search bar, I hummed in contemplation as my fingers flew across the keyboard yet again in typing out a question I wasn't exactly sure how to word. Why do other civilizations... I paused, unsure how to continue the thought. Hovering below the search bar were a collection of automatic results, the first among them being, why do other civilizations fail? Much as the question made my blood boil with its sheer arrogance, I could hardly deny my own curiosity regarding how the Irijon might deign to answer it. Inhaling deeply yet again in preparation for the sheer volume of utter bullshit I was about to subject myself to, I tapped upon the autocomplete and selected the first result labeled the civilization hypothesis. Essentially, as far as the writer posits, because life on other planets evolves competitively, so too do civilizations that develop there. From the very moment sapients on one planet develop a culture, that culture will perpetually be at war against other ways of life. Supposedly, within this perpetual conflict, peaceful and cooperative cultures unwilling to surrender their morals will universally collapse beneath the crushing weight of more oppressive ones willing to perform the terrible acts necessary to win out. This section of the paper concluded with a reference to some quote from a famous philosopher within their empire. The good handicap one of their legs before battle, because to do so befits their morals. The evil take this chance to cripple the other because to do so befits their morals. After that quote, the author began to contrast this usual civilizational development with that of their own people. Whereas most good civilizations are devoured in their cradle by ravenous siblings before they can even defend themselves, the modern Irigan culture of rights and empathy was lucky enough to be born alongside only twins of itself, allowing them a chance to mature and blend into the galactic superpower, for there were no others as far as they could tell. With more scholarly research lacking in direction, I eventually turned my eyes to a more pedestrian perspective, specifically that of Iragon social media. Plastered upon the front page of their predominant platform, I found all manner of images and videos depicting dozens of different species coexisting together. In one video, an amphibian-like alien was explaining the intricacies of her favorite movie series, while in another, a Rekis infant could be seen playing with an Iragon who, judging by the captions, was his adoptive mother. Apparently, an election cycle was rolling around within the empire, and with it came a veritable pile of political adverts. One thing I very quickly noticed was that despite the diversity of their empire, only Iragon candidates could be seen. Digging further into this, I discovered rather quickly the reasoning behind this anomaly. According to one imperial law, no person belonging to a competitive species could run for non-advisory roles in public office. Setting aside that revelation, however, there was something admittedly soothing about scrolling through their social media. Everyone seemed so happy with their lot in life that for the briefest moment I was almost lulled into believing the Iragon's lie. Almost. These people weren't happy because they had everything taken from them. They were happy in spite of it. In fact, for all I knew, none of them were even real. I wouldn't put it past Zimera to construct this whole page as an elaborate lie to trick new species into signing away their freedom. No, I couldn't allow this fate to befall humanity, nor the Kafel. Somehow, I had to find a way to combat them. In order to do so, I had to better understand what we were up against. "How many ships in Irigan fleet?" I murmured to myself as I typed, clicking upon the resulting link, an official report by their military. The numbers were staggering. 1 million destroyers, hundreds of thousands of cruisers, and over 1,000 dreadnoughts. Though it had been thousands of years since their last galactic war, the Irigan were apparently determined not to be caught off guard. Complementing this already ridiculous setup were 36 battleships the size of small moons and one vessel ominously referred to as Finality. My throat felt dry with anxiety as I typed the name into the search bar. Finality. This, as far as the Iragon claimed, was their most impressive feat of military engineering. A mobile Dyson sphere tooled to all-out war and equipped with multiple planet-destroying weapons. Though never officially used in battle, this vessel would nevertheless be capable of taking on a fleet of millions by itself. Ever scarier than that fact alone was that they were apparently planning to build 10 more in the following centuries. Dread drilled into my chest as I contemplated just how hopeless the situation was. Unless I could somehow talk the Iragon into staying their hand, it would be next to impossible for humanity to stand against them. This was a civilization thousands of years ahead of ours. There was no future in which a fight between us would be anything remotely close to fair. Suddenly, the communicator's search engine seemed to shut down of its own volition, and I found myself staring at a blank notes page. For a moment, I simply sat there upon the bed, perplexed by what had just happened. Then, however, a collection of words I hadn't expected appeared on screen. "You want freedom for your species?" it asked, prompting a paranoid search of my surroundings as I looked for any hidden cameras or other devices Zimera could be using to monitor me. "Relax," it continued, seemingly in response to my newfound suspicions. "I'm a friend, here to help." "Like hell you are," I murmured beneath my breath. This had to be one of Zimera's games. Maybe she was planning to coax out more information on Earth by pretending to be some kind of rebel hacker. "How about I prove it?" The text continued, uploading the link to a file containing some kind of massive physics equation. "Those are the galactic coordinates of Earth. Zimera wants them so the Empire can rescue Earth. If you do as I say, you can use this to send an FTL message warning them." "Who are you?" I whispered into the mic. Like I said, a friend. This was not a satisfactory answer. "Listen here," I hissed, trying my best to keep my voice down despite the well of emotions bubbling up within. "I'm done just taking people's word for things. Tell me who you are before I launch this fucking thing across the room." For a few seconds, the screen went blank, inciting within me fears that I might have laid it on too strong. Eventually, however, whoever was on the other side decided to continue. "Call me Baoth. I'm the leader of a resistance movement called the Recalcitrants." "All right then, Baoth," I murmured quietly, watching as the text deleted itself upon my acknowledgement. "You said I can warn humanity?" "Assuming you can access a comms network, yes. You'll need to slip Zimera's grasp to find one, but if you can, I should be able to mask the signal so nobody here detects it." "And what then?" I asked despairingly. "What the fuck is humanity going to do about this? We can't fight them." "Listen," the text continued. I don't contact every species like this. For most of them, you'd be right that there is no hope. That being said, I've calculated a 0.86% chance humanity can pull this off if you just do as I say. Bottom line, if you want the Kafel and humanity to stay independent, you have to do everything I ask. But why are you fighting them? Again, the text took a while to appear, suggesting that its author was thinking heavily about what next to say. I believe in the freedom of a species to decide its own fate, for better or worse. With your help, we can break the cycle of pain perpetuated by my misguided kin. Let's say I was in, I began, maintaining a healthy degree of skepticism regarding the true intentions of this enigmatic correspondence. What would you want me to do? For now, I need you to focus on sending that signal to your species. If you can do that, I have a plan for what we'll do next. You'll need to send the message within 2 months. If you don't, your kind won't have enough time to prepare. I sent you the address of our hideout in this city. Once you escape Zamera, go there and we can talk again. Do we have a deal? It seemed that I had only 2 options here. I could warn humanity about the Iragon, going along with this long-shot plan. Then again, if I used the location of Earth as a bargaining chip with Zamera, perhaps I could convince her to try something different this time. Neither option seemed ideal. That being said, if this was my only chance to accept Bouth's help, I had only one question left to ask. Why humanity? This time my answer came in without delay. Your kind are special, unique in every way. You're not like the rest. No other species besides we Iragon has passed the interstellar filter. If the Iragon are perfection, then humanity is its antithesis. Your people are perfectly wrong, and that's exactly what we need.